Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Relationship Talk with Jeff and Trish. I'm Patricia Ireland of Insight for Life, and Jeff Visnic will be joining me shortly, and he is with Reclamation Collaborative. And today we're going to be talking about boundaries, creating them and maintaining them. And there's Jeff now. Hello, welcome back.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Awesome. So today we are going to be talking about creating and maintaining boundaries.
Yes, that's a good
It's a,
topic.
it is. It's something I struggled with in the beginning because I couldn't really understand that I needed boundaries, let alone that there weren't any instilled, and the importance of it. There was things going under my radar. I wasn't noticing. I didn't know. We're human beings and we're flailing and just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I wasn't great at it either, until I kind of got to the point where I was a little broken and had to figure out that's why, because I wasn't maintaining any boundaries.
yeah, me too. Me too. And it's like I said, it's really difficult to even understand that we need them,
Yeah,
comprehend that.
yeah,
So
yeah. A lot
what
of
is
times we're not even aware why we're doing things.
yeah.
We just do them because we think we're supposed to.
So what is the purpose of a boundary? Why do we need them?
Well, I think we need them because it helps us live to our values, whatever our values are. It helps us stick within those values so we can feel good about ourselves and so that we can take care of ourselves and, be the best version of ourselves. If we don't have any, then we're none of those things because we're morphing to be whatever we think other people want us to be or need us to be.
And that's what makes it so hard to even understand what our values are. I mean, I remember, some things I was pretty solid on, but I didn't realize I was creating a boundary. It was
Yeah.
just, like um, I knew from my past that I didn't want any violence in my relationship. So it was a hard boundary, and I didn't know that it was. It was just something I felt, and and thankfully I did because that actually held up within the relationship. But other things would go by the wayside because, like you're saying, I didn't see the value one in myself, let alone in what was in front of me, what was going on.
Yeah, what's interesting when you have a boundary like that you had, no violence in the relationship. That wasn't a hard boundary for you to keep either.
No.
It was really easy probably for you to keep because you were so clear that that's what your value was.
Yeah, it was a no-brainer. It was just, this isn't happening. So it was
Yeah.
like,
Whereas with a lot of boundaries, we have a really hard time setting them because we're not clear on why, or we don't we don't see the value in having the boundary there.
yeah. And I used to find I got very wishy-washy. And this was actually an area that I found a coach very helpful with, was because, like, anytime I was dealing with certain situations, it was always the fact that I had wishy-washy boundaries. And it was never clear to my husband what was really going on. And he's
Yeah.
thinking one thing I'm saying, and I'm like, no, and I'm trying to make him understand, but I couldn't because I wasn't clear.
Yeah. That's an important point.
And then, I'm wondering why um, he's going off this direction when I clearly said this is not okay.
Yeah.
But he found a way to manipulate that, and well, he didn't say this part. And I'm like, well, I didn't realize I had to. There's so many
Right.
aspects of it. where
Yeah.
clarity really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So how do we know when we need to put in these boundaries? So how do we take out this wishy-washy?
Well, I think first of all, it's when we feel worn down in any certain area of life, whether it's we're worn out of our relationship, we're tired of the person, we're exhausted ourselves, we're worn out from our job, um, our kids, whatever part of life has got us down. That's probably a good place to start, and then go from there.
Yeah, because it always starts with the pain, right? This is
Yeah.
not working.
And
And
so, and
then,
sometimes that pain has to get really intense,
yeah, yeah,
before we realize that we cannot continue that way, because we a lot of us have pretty high tolerance for pain, maybe not physical pain, but emotional pain, because we've learned to cope with it for so long that we just think that's normal, or we push through, or we don't see that something there needs to change, or that it would be good if it did.
and that was just it. I always thought like I had to keep taking it or learning to take it because it was like more hurt and pains coming at me. And it's like, this is where that victim mode comes in. It's like I would feel like this victim and I had to keep taking more crap.
Yeah.
Only we don't.
Well, and I would think a lot of times there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't figure this out. I couldn't push through it. I couldn't find the answer. And so then I would just be really hard on myself, that I wasn't resolving what needed to be resolved. And why couldn't I? And, other people seem to. What's wrong with me?
Yeah. That was the main reason why I got coaching in the first place. It had hit, rock bottom. I had no other, I thought I was going crazy. I I didn't know which way was up anymore. It was like something was wrong with me. Like I just
Yeah.
felt that I had to fix something because I'm broken.
Yeah.
This is not working.
Oh, I was there too. That's kind of what pushed me into it as well. Had a job that wasn't working, had a relationship that wasn't working, um, and just life in general didn't seem to be working. Um, and I wasn't getting to where I wanted to be, and so yeah. But I thought it was all my fault,
Yeah.
and in some ways it was, because I wasn't putting boundaries in place.
Right. And it is a key component because this is where we discover our worth and our value and our importance in our family and society and everything. This is
Yeah.
why we're not happy. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't have to get to that point. I mean, wouldn't you personally love to see that people would want to get that coaching now before
Yes.
reaching rock bottom
Yes.
like we did?
Yes. Avoid the high pain.
Right?
Yeah.
I'd rather you didn't have to suffer all that pain.
Yeah, even if it just feels like a little something's off, maybe it's a little tweak here or there. It's not a huge life change. It's we can make a few small changes, and it can have a pretty big impact on our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember contacting my coach all the time because it was, now this event's happening. I got this handled and this, figured out, but it's like, okay, now this is happening.
Yeah.
And then it was always the same thing, a different value of my own that I wasn't clear on. Always.
Yep.
So
Or
how
not being, or I guess a value, or even where I found people struggle is they don't have their own definition of success.
Mhm.
Right? Like for my own life, what does success look like? Not for my neighbor's life, not for my boss's life, not for whoever, or even my spouse. It's, what does it look like for me? And if we're not clear on that, how could we ever make any decisions?
Because even that, like I was taught to, you know, draw from my parents' values or my
Yep.
parents' ideas of what things should look like or be,
Yep.
which, I mean, there's this whole other dynamic I wasn't even privy to, is what it felt like.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
there are other options. Wow.
Yeah. No, that's it. Even I did the same thing, right? My parents lived the American dream, and they had steady jobs, and they had a house in the suburbs and two kids and everything they could ever want, and they seemed happy.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I want to be happy, if I create this life it's the exact same as theirs, then that's what'll
There's the
happen.
mold.
Yeah.
There's the mold. They'll just follow that mold. Oh, it
And I'm
doesn't
sure
work.
they were happy, but we never had a conversation, right? Like, do you wish there was anything different with your life, or do you wish you had done anything different? We never had that conversation. Well, I was happy as a kid, so they must have been happy. So here we go.
Right,
Let's do the same thing.
right. And we don't fit that mold is the big
Nope.
problem.
Mm-mm.
And we never will. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what mold we try to fit into, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have to discover our own mold.
And there were things that were important to them because of how they were raised, right? So they took those things and made them important to them in their relationship and what that looked like. But it didn't necessarily apply to us because we weren't raised by their parents.
Right?
So they course
Yeah.
corrected, and so we got the benefit of that. But now there are different things that are important to us.
And boundaries really help with build trust. Like I know a lot of people don't trust. I know that was a big factor for me, is I didn't trust um, really men at the time, let alone other people with other situations. And trust was always a huge issue. So how do you feel that boundaries really solidify trust?
Well, I think it helps people be clear on where you stand on things, and so they know that if I interact with this person in this way, this is what I'm going to get. Um, so there's no surprises. So I think that in some ways helps people build trust. Are there other ways you think you can think of that?
No, that's totally right. And I'd also add to that is just that it's not a boundary is not um, saying that the other person is bad or wrong. It's
Right.
about saying this is my boundary. This is something I need for me, and if you want to be in my life, I need you to accept that. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And this is why, like, the understanding is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point. I think, it's discerning what works for us and what doesn't, and not judging other people if they're different than us.
And that's the big thing is a lot of I was always afraid of hurting the other person's feelings or upsetting them or pushing them away. But really, it comes down to this is my life, and I need to live it this way because this is how I feel trusted and trustworthy and safe and appreciated and loved and respected.
Well, I
And
think
if
the other thing that's interesting that happens when you do have these boundaries and are really clear on your values and what success means to you is we can be more authentically ourselves. And when we're more authentically ourselves and not trying to put on this, facade for other people, we actually connect with the people who are in a similar mindset, or right, are similar to us, and so there's trust there, right? That like we are actually with our people, and we're not trying to be with people who are not our people.
exactly. And on that note, I noticed like when I did um, put boundaries in place, I used to surround myself in people that were um, in the same boat as me and kind of wishy-washy and manipulative, like I ended up being. Not that I wanted to be, but it's what I did. Is that when we're not um, being true about ourselves, like I said, we're we're feeling bad, so we kind of cater to those things, which goes against us, which we end up manipulating the situations to still try and get our needs to control it, but it never
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
And then when I started to place boundaries, that's exactly what happened. Is then all of a sudden these people that resonated with me started to flow into my life. It was like
Hmm.
this altered reality started to happen, and it
Yeah.
does, because the people that you knew that understand where you're coming from, they're added, and then there's new ones that come.
Yeah. Yep. And the ones that don't, go away too because they don't like it. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's so I think that helps build trust too, right? That you're just more on the same page with the people who are in your life.
exactly, exactly. And it just feels comfortable. It just feels safe, and you
Yeah.
feel like you can trust them and speak to them about just about anything because
Yeah.
you share similar values.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And you know that you can have a conversation with them and, work through something
yes,
without it being, devastating to the relationship too, right? Because you're both working towards the same thing.
I know I have friends now that have made different choices than I do, but I understand their choice. It still might
Yeah.
not be a choice that I would make, but it's you have the right to that. But I'm okay and still respect them, and vice versa, because
Yeah.
we're our own people. And
Yeah.
that's the bigger difference is, okay, I know your boundaries and you know mine, and let's,
Yeah.
agree to disagree, and that's okay.
Yeah. 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 We can coexist here with our boundaries in place.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So once a boundary is in place, can we change it if it doesn't suit us anymore?
Can you? Is that what you
Yeah,
asked?
yeah,
Yeah,
can we?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're all growing and evolving. I think we all are, if we're open to it, learning things every day. So I think we're absolutely, have the right to change a boundary if we want to. If we
Is that
want
even,
to. That's the
yeah,
key part.
right. Because I've had clients that say, well, I don't find that, I need this, like, if it was abuse or whatever, it's like, well, I feel safe now with this. Like, I don't feel that really needs to be a boundary, but, you know, m maybe if I change it to this, I'm like, so do that.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need anyone's permission. It's,
Yeah.
it's where you're at.
Yeah.
That boundary doesn't need to be as intense anymore.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
there's certain things that, as we're evolving, that, you do this and I'll leave you. Well, okay, I get that that's not going to happen, but here's, this other area that's, kind of not as bad, you know. So you
Yeah.
redefine it.
Yeah. And I think as the people in our lives evolve too, right, we have to give them some room to change and grow as well and adjust our boundaries accordingly as long as we still want them in our lives. Obviously, you think about parents getting older or kids getting older and that relationship dynamic changes, even our spouse getting older, right? That dynamic of our relationship changes, and we do different things depending on where people are at in life. um, we like, as our parents age, we have to be more involved and take care of them and do things that we probably wouldn't have done when they were in the middle of their life, right? So,
Yeah.
or with our kids, we have to let them, when they get to a certain age, make their own choices, whereas we might have had boundaries as to what they could do when they lived with us.
And especially with kids is, the boundaries that we had with them as children, once they hit that adult phase, like, I had to explain to them, like, these were our rules, but you are going to be setting your own. You're going to be
Yeah.
creating, based on your own lifestyle and wants and needs in your life. It's so that they understand that these especially as a teenager, like these boundaries are, you know, for your safety as a child. But now that you're an adult, these boundaries change. They become your boundaries. What boundaries
Yeah.
do you need?
I was watching a House Hunters last night, and boy, did that daughter need some boundaries in place with her mom, who was trying to control every decision that she made. Um, it was to the point where I could hardly even watch it because of everything she was telling her to do.
I I know I have a relative that's very controlling, even in the daughter's, adult life, and it's so difficult to watch. It is
Yeah,
because they have life of their own that they need to live, and they feel that, they'd be hurting them or disappointing them or disrespecting them and all these things. And if anything, you're disrespecting yourself, not them.
yeah,
Not them. They're the ones doing the disrespecting.
right.
It's like a bird, once they reach a certain age, they have to fly, or no offense, but they die. Like
Yeah,
this is just nature. Like
yeah,
comes a time you have to learn and know and grow on your own.
yep.
Yes, these boundaries are very important for that.
They are very important. I was like, your daughter is 30 years old, ma'am. She can buy whatever house she wants to.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm sure she can manage it.
Probably.
Uh, so, can others add their own boundaries?
To Do you mean
If
can
you,
other people have their own?
yeah, if you've got a boundary in place and they want to add their own boundaries, is that okay?
Absolutely. I think so. We're all allowed to have our own boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is the reason I asked this question is because the the fact that we can be open to other people experiencing and and giving and showing their own value is just as important. Like we want
Yeah.
them to respect ours. Of course, we want to be able to respect theirs as well.
Yeah. And ultimately, anybody who's in my life, I want them to just be able to be themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and
whatever
not
that,
be ashamed of that.
yeah. And then it comes down to, okay, this is who this person is. Do I want them in my life or not? And we're all allowed to make that decision. Um, and the other person may not even have to agree with that decision, but we're all allowed to make that decision. Um, but it's important that it's a want and not like a have to.
Right, exactly. Because you don't have to do anything.
We don't. I tell my wife that all the time. I don't have to do anything. Nobody makes me do anything.
Yeah, it's true. And then that in itself is kind of a boundary because we're letting them know that, you can try to control, but I'm letting you know it's not going to work. Like
Yes.
it's that boundary,
Yeah.
as simple as that is. So how do we know um, when somebody is manipulating a boundary?
Manipulating a boundary. That's a good question. It's a lot easier to tell when they're breaking a boundary. Um, I'm not
They're
sure.
pushing the edge of a boundary.
Well, I think we have to listen to our own inner voice, our own intuition that tells us how we feel about what they're doing in the moment, and ask ourselves, what are we committed to still? And then we can act on that. But if we're not open to feeling how we feel about what's happening, then we're not going to know that they're manipulating the boundary.
So if somebody is um, kind of pushing it, but let's say we just, nonchalantly say, what you're doing right now is not okay. Well, it's kind of broad, right? So then they go and they do something similar but slightly different.
Uh-huh.
So then how do we know what to add or change or emphasize differently? Like what is it we need to do to create these boundaries?
Well, we need to be clear on what we want. But it's also, I think it needs to be an open conversation that we're kind of exploring as we navigate through whatever we're going through. Because, especially in a relationship, right? If there's two people, I could say, I think in coaching, it's really important that, and a lot of times I'll ask people to define a word. And they're like, well, that's silly. Why would I define this word? We all know what this word means. And it's like, no, we don't all know what this word means. You may
Right.
think it means this. I may think it means this. So, we could say something and think that we're being really clear. And to us, we were clear, but to our partner, they may take it another way, or they may interpret it another way. And so I think it does need to be this ongoing dialogue of,
Yes.
okay, well, that's, yes, I did say that, and I can see how you've interpreted it this way, but what you did over here still doesn't work for me.
Right.
So let's re-clarify that.
Right. Because that's what I was getting at, is just that. It's like it's how we feel. It's like, okay, they don't know that, you are upset by what just happened. Because from what they understand, they're following the boundary.
Yep.
So it's that clear understanding, and we need to express what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, and how we got there. And some people, I mean, I remember getting very frustrated because it was like, what don't you understand? Explain. I was clear,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not entirely because they don't understand where, like, certain pieces, or what you're really getting at, or in their terms. Just like you said, I might think of this word as this, and he's got this other definition.
Yeah, and even being married for almost 20 years, there's still things that I learn about her as we go through, and so something may be really important to her, but I don't really know the backstory as to why
Right.
until we've stumbled upon this in our relationship. And so even just being open to hearing why something is so important to somebody, I think can really help bridge that gap too, of getting on the same page.
And I learned to actually pay more attention to body language too.
Mm.
My husband used to deflect with, I call it the circles. He'd go around in circles, and you have to get back to the main point. And I would see his reaction, and sometimes, like, when I would go back to the original topic or the original boundary, and he'd kind of smirk, and I was like, you're dodging me. Why are you
Uh-huh.
dodging me? And then you have to be clear. Like, you have to break down those barriers that are causing them to try and avoid your boundary.
Yeah.
Like, it does take patience and understanding of each other, and acceptance of, you're both learning through this stuff. So if anytime your wife heard a boundary, did she just go, okay, and yep,
No, no.
they're done? They're got
If
it.
only it was
Really,
that simple.
right?
No, no, I think they've been established over time as we've gone through things and adjusted. And no, it's usually not accepted immediately. I mean, there are some things for sure where we're on the same page about things, but there are other things where 20 years in, we're still having some conversations that we probably had way back then.
Yeah. And that's just it too, is I find as the relationship evolves, you're getting more deeper understanding of your values. Like, they become more and more clear to you, and
Mm-hmm.
and with your partner for their own. But you start to get more clear, and you start to define it even better. Um, like, I know when I first started this, like, you know, certain things with the house cleaning and things, I'm like, it's not even worth the fight. And now it's become like, now that my husband and I are on our own, it becomes like more important because
Mm-hmm.
there's there's only the two of us, and now it's like, come on, like,
Yeah.
and here's my new boundary,
Hmm.
you know, and it's for other reasons. Like sometimes it's just in the evolution of each other, like you were saying
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's our values have gotten more, have changed. Like, yeah, I've grown here. Okay, now this is now in the forefront. So here's a new understanding.
Yeah. And even for us, as we added kids to the relationship, things that were important before became less important, right? So it was constantly shifting and evolving. Um, I
Over
mean,
time,
I was just going to say things that seemed really important got less important, you know,
and
the
then
more
they
we
become
had a
more
kid.
important. That's what we had. These are important. Okay, well, okay, now because they aren't so important anymore. But then later it becomes more important again.
Okay, all right, good. Good. I'll be glad to get back to it.
Yeah. But it's funny, like you're saying, how that evolves, but it's like trusting, and it doesn't matter how many times you change. We all change like the weather, but it's because we're growing and learning.
Yeah.
And it's being okay with that. It's like, well, this is where I'm at now, and this is why I need this. And maybe an event happened. Maybe, you know, there's so many variables of, but we're all unique. We're all different. We have to acknowledge that fact and deal with the new situation
Yeah.
accordingly. Everything.
Yeah. It all happens through dialogue, communication.
And speaking of the communication, what is the best way to communicate these boundaries? So if I just say, um, violence in my relationship is just unacceptable, and if it happens, we're done. Is that enough?
Probably not. I think it's helpful. It's helpful to explain to people why it's a boundary. Um, but I do think there are times where just saying no, I'm not going to do that is okay too, right? We don't. And I'm thinking more outside the relationship. I think within a relationship, we owe each other a little bit more of an explanation. But when we get outside the relationship, there are some situations where I don't know that we owe everybody an explanation as to why we will or won't do something. I think,
No,
if they care about us, they'll accept that we're just not willing to do that.
yeah, it becomes an option if we choose to,
Yeah.
but definitely not. We don't have to. But yes, with people that we really love and care about, and respect, we want them to know why. And getting deep into those emotions takes us actually just asking ourselves some deep questions. And that can be tough. This is where a coach has always been helpful for me. I don't know about you, but it
Yeah.
it helps me get clear on what I'm actually feeling. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm feeling and I'm just reacting. So how would I know how to place a boundary when I don't even know what to put a boundary on?
Yeah.
And life throws stuff at us all the time that create these scenarios.
Yeah. I agree. I'm thinking specifically of my parents, where I feel like I've tried to establish a boundary and explain why many times, and they just don't seem to want to hear it. Um, and so sometimes I struggle with, am I continuing to explain this boundary, or am I just saying, nope, I'm not doing that? And I guess you can get mad at me if you don't want, if you want to, but I feel like I've tried to explain this and you're not getting it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that's my own stuff there.
And that in itself is just deeper understanding for ourselves. It's
Yeah.
the same scenario. It's like we just need to dive deeper. Like, why do I want them to know? Why is that important? And just keep asking questions. It's like once we get that clear answer, it's like, oh, this is why I'm feeling this way. You
Yeah.
know, once we get that aha moment, great. Then we know how to place that boundary. We know what to say to them because this is how we've discovered that we feel. So it's easier to voice. But
Yeah.
yeah, when they're just not getting it, we're just not clear enough. We just need to keep asking more questions of ourselves.
Okay. I guess I'll have to do that then.
Yeah, and I get caught up in them all the time. And I see my coaches, my husband's really good at helping pull those out now too, or
Yeah.
helping me get to the root. Because it's not easy. We don't, we try to pretend it doesn't exist, or we try to push it aside and, end up dealing with the situation, but not in a productive way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve us. And then it becomes, okay, now it has to happen. And having that coaching is I'd say like the most important thing I've ever done in my life and continue to do, because otherwise it's hard to really hold yourself accountable sometimes.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Yeah. That's the truth. It's much easier to not deal with it at times.
And sometimes we want to just avoid, and
Yeah.
sometimes we need a kick in the pants to no longer avoid, because it's what we really want.
Yeah.
And those boundaries are needed for all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So in order to maintain a boundary, what do both or all parties need to ensure that they stick to them?
Well, I think in some ways we need to have a deeper understanding of ourselves, like we've talked about, right? A lot of times we'll cave on our boundaries because we're worried about what we think somebody's going to think about us, when the reality is we don't know what they're going to think about us. And I guess I would say more importantly, does it matter what they think about us if we stick to our boundaries? So I think if we have some deeper understanding of why we have a hard time sticking to certain boundaries, that will help us stick with them going forward better. Like I didn't know why. I mean, we've talked about this, right? If we're not clear on what our values are or what's important to us, we just don't know why we can't hold certain boundaries in place, and there's a reason why. We just need to dig deeper to figure that out.
And this was partially why I didn't bring it up a minute ago when you were talking about your parents, but agreements are, because
Yes.
I was going to bring it up with this question, but agreements are our way of solidifying that boundary. So if we have that agreement in place, it's got to be strong enough with the consequences needed, and we need to actually follow through with those consequences, because they're really important boundaries that need to be upheld. And if you want to maintain that loving relationship, agreements have to happen, and the consequences for them if they don't, because they're not going to want to break it, because they don't want the same person.
There's the problem. We don't agree.
And that's just it. If they break it, then you know that relationship was not meant to be. They're not your people.
Yeah, that's hard to say.
What's that?
I said that's hard to say with your parents.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I had to do that with my dad at one time, and it was it just had to happen. And eventually he came around. It actually took him getting sick before he came around. And because he was sick, I had actually just gone to see him. He hadn't even called me. It was his friend that called me. And I just went, because we do what the heart tells us to do. And I went. And he actually had apologized, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So sometimes even putting boundaries with family and making those agreements is important,
Yeah.
because they're not in the space at the time to see it or get it or understand it, but they would. Sometimes they're a little hard-headed,
Yeah.
thick.
Especially
Yeah.
us guys, right?
What's that?
Especially us guys, right?
Sometimes, yes, pride can be tricky.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, pride's the big one I find with men, and
Yeah.
and I understand that. It's, you know, they've been taught to be, this is how you are manly, this is how you know, and they were taught to hold that pride, even if it's goes against feelings and thoughts and values.
Yep.
Okay, but I understand them and I have respect for them. Um, but I also will break them down if they're not valuable
Yeah.
pride pieces.
All
Tried to ask
right.
them. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, sometimes they think it's, you know, they're doing what they need to do. Maybe at the time they do, but sometimes they're not healthy
Yeah.
reasons. And that's a big part of this, just talking and communicating. And that was the first time my dad was actually willing to talk about it. Otherwise, it was just an argument.
Yeah.
So yeah, we went a few years without speaking.
Hmm.
But the beauty of it is our relationship now is better than it's ever been my entire life. So
That's great.
sometimes, not sometimes. I
Yeah.
I would have to say putting these boundaries is the most important thing we can do because that initiates change. It initiates growth,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't seem like it in the moment.
Yep. And we don't, waiting until we get sick. Hopefully we all don't have to wait that long.
And sometimes it just does take that
Yeah.
scare or pressure or whatever to shake us out of whatever we're in.
Yeah. Well, it helps you figure out what's important to you. That's
Priorities.
probably where you're right.
Priorities.
Get clear on what was important to him. Yeah.
And for him, I'm an only child, so
Yeah.
that's, you know, even less people in his life if, you know, when you're the only family really close to them, you know, it's a difficult situation for him, but
Yeah.
we'll all get there. So anything else you wanted to add or you want to close this, wrap this up with?
No, I mean, it's hard to do, right? People are not going to react well initially, maybe. But it's important that we, if it's important to us, it's important that we stick with it, even if it may not be well received, or, um, you know, it's an important thing to put in place.
And it's tough love.
Yeah.
It's the biggest thing, and people have a hard time with the tough love, but those are important because
Yeah.
that's how people learn to love each other and accept their values and their differences.
Yeah.
Tough love.
Yeah. I've even just today I've been grouchy because the people at work, had vacations scheduled and they're blowing them off because their projects are demanding. And to me, that's just a blatant breaking of your own boundaries. And it's not a precedent as a leader I want to set, or, there will always be a reason why you should break the boundary, but we got to listen to what's important to us.
Yep, and we can't want it more for them than
No,
they
we
want it for
cannot.
themselves.
I can't force somebody to keep their boundaries in place.
Yeah, we can help remind them of the value and importance of those boundaries, but ultimately it's their choice, and they're
Yep.
very easy to break, sure.
Yeah.
But when it's important to us, And we don't let that make or break
Yeah,
or shake us.
it goes back to your point at the beginning, right? When you had a boundary that was, this was it, black or white, there was no breaking it. And that's how we should be about all of them.
Yeah. Some are kind of minors, but there's
Yeah,
certain ones that are majors, and we need to see them as majors because we are the only ones who suffer from them if we don't make them a major.
yeah. Well, skipping a planned vacation is not a breakable boundary for me. I can tell you that much. There is nothing that could happen at work that will get me to skip a vacation.
Yeah, that's why my husband and I like voting every weekend in the spring, summer, fall is like so important.
Yeah.
And we even got robbed of a few weekends, well, month or two worth of weekends because of COVID. So that's not okay.
Yeah, and I mean something like COVID happens, right? And it shows you, oh, well, maybe these are what's important to me. So even a situation like that that's been tough on everybody, I think for me has made really clear what is important. So
Yeah, and everybody has their rights to their feelings, their thoughts, their opinions. Yours are no less valuable than my own.
nope.
Don't let anybody ever make you think differently because it's not true.
Yep. Does anybody have any questions for us who's on? Or I guess if you're watching later, ask questions.
Yeah, just let us know you're watching live. Let us know you're watching the replay. We're happy to answer any questions. Boundaries are a tough subject, but they can get clear very fast.
Yes. And then it's a lot of work to put them in place.
Yeah, because it means being raw, it means being real with people.
Mm-hmm.
It's that tough love stuff. Get you in the
Yep.
boo-boo every time.
Yes, it
But they're
does.
worth it. They're worth
Yep.
it.
All
Well
right.
then, any ideas for next week?
Ooh, I should have anticipated that question and I didn't. um, I don't have any that are coming to mind at the moment. I'll think about it.
We, we will figure something out through the week and we will let
Yeah.
everyone know and update you with the new topic for next week. So until then, thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Again,
We'll see you
drop us
later.
a message. And if you are interested in coaching, whether from Jeff or myself, feel free to message. I'll again leave those links again. It's been a few weeks since I've done that. So just a refresher, I'll put them up again if anybody is interested. Even if you've never experienced coaching, you know, just to try it out. Our initial session is free. I believe you do the same as well,
Yeah,
right, Jeff?
absolutely. Yep.
And is to get to know us, see if it's right for you, and if not, we're not offended.
Nope. Not
We're
at
here
all.
for you. Okay, so until next week, thank you all for
All right.
coming, everybody. Bye,
Bye.
Jeff.